Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Troy Erickson from the Secrets of Scale podcast, as well as Email Secrets Inner Circle. And today I have really exciting guests that I met at the Flight Club Mastermind in San Diego, California. He's coming in all the way from Arizona, and he's sold around $70 million worth of stuff through his Experts Agency, which is a Facebook ad agency. I was talking to him at the event, and I was taking like so many pages of notes from just a personal conversation. And he's been on stages across the world, and I thought there'd be no better place to have him here than on the Secrets of Scale podcast. So please welcome Bailey Proulx. Bailey, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic, Troy. Thank you for having me on here. Really appreciate it. How are you doing today?
Amazing. Thank you for asking. So,
Good.
we've got people, watching all across the world from Florida, Barcelona, Germany, all over the
Nice.
place. And the first question I was like to ask is, where are you from? Like, what did you do when you were growing up, and how the heck did you get into our industry?
Oh, that is a long story, but I'll make it kind of short here. So I grew up in Seattle, Washington, actually a place a little more south of Seattle named Bonnie Lake. So a little small lake out there in Washington. So growing up, I mean, I just had a lot of hard time having jobs. I think I had the typical entrepreneur story where I had a lawn mowing, landscaping business growing up. And the moment I had jobs, I went through, I think, 6 jobs in maybe 4 or 5 months. Never got fired, just ended up just quitting all of them. And then there was a point where my dad offered me to see if I wanted to get into a network marketing opportunity back in 2014. And at the time, they were teaching internet marketing. And so we were doing that for a while. And eventually, our ad account actually got hacked into. At this time, PayPal wouldn't give you your money back unless Facebook said that, hey, you officially got hacked. And at the time, in 2014, if you guys have been around that long, you couldn't contact Facebook. There's no way to contact them. You couldn't mail them. You couldn't email them. There's no tech support. There's nothing. So we basically lost almost all of our money we had saved up for our advertising budget and had to restart from the ground up. I didn't have an advertising budget, but I had this skill set. So I actually reached out to a person that I saw that was speaking on stage a few months earlier. His name was Cal Kanai. I saw him speak on stage and I was like, hey, I know you were the fastest growing person in the company from zero to $40,000 a month. In that process, I'm sure there's some things you want to offload. And like, I have this expertise. I'm local in America. I don't know if you want to hire someone overseas or in America, but like, here's what I can do to help serve you. And he's like, usually I don't respond to this, but yeah, I mean, thanks for reaching out. And kind of the whole thing that he told me later was came to him in the approach of how can I help serve you? Not can like, how can I get something back from you? And it was purely just from a service standpoint. So we were together for a few months. He kind of saw like my work ethic, and then he ended up leaving that company. And so I ended up having this thing in my head at the time. So I was like, I'm never going back to a job. He was like my biggest client. And I was so stuck in that where I ended up creating my business based off of scarcity. And I actually started to really bleed into a lot of different things I was doing. So at that point, I actually went back and got a job for a few years. I used to sell phones at Sprint after that. And then I was like the director of technology at that Sprint location, kind of worked my way up through there. And then a few years later, this big influencer in the space had a webinar that he was doing. And it was like one of the OGs in the space. I don't know if I can say his name. So it was one of the OGs in the space. And he was talking someone up for like a half an hour. And I was like, who is this guy talking about? And then Callow walked out. And I was like, oh, that's, I used to work with him a few years ago. Like, that's my boy. So I reached out to him and I was like, hey, bro, so you're doing great things. Congratulations. It's awesome to see you doing good. He's like, hey, man, actually, let's hop on a call tomorrow. So I hopped on the call tomorrow and he's like, hey, man, so I have this vision of this company that I'm building right now. And I want you to be a part of it. I know how hard you work. I want you to come move out to Vegas. Again, I was living in Seattle at the time. Move out to Vegas, be my right-hand man, help me build this company from the ground up. Here's my vision of it. We're going to have events. We're going to have trainings. We're going to have this big staff. And I was like, let me think about it for a day. I had a girlfriend back home, family, dogs. I had like everything back home. And I had 2 weeks to move. Like literally it was like, hey, phone call. You have to be here in 2 weeks. And so I was like, I think it's one of those opportunities where if I don't take it, I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life. But if I do take it and it doesn't work out, at least I know it doesn't work out. But if it does, then cool. Like then it works out. And keep in mind, I still actually never met him in person at this point. I've had like maybe 10, 20 like Zoom calls with him, but still really never even met him in person. And so I got to get rid of everything in Seattle and fly over there. So yeah, then I moved out there and helped him build his. First of all, I had no idea where I was going to live. I was like house hopping and like couch hopping for a while, working 16 hours a day, literally 7 days a week. And within the first year, we brought that company from zero to $20 million a year within the first year. Started throwing events. We had up to 700 people at our events. Had 5-6 million people, I think, total leads that we've generated that company. And then a few years ago, I branched off, started the agency because through that time, I realized that there was this big gap. There was the people that were doing advertising for info that had such good margins, they didn't really actually know how to advertise. No offense. But it was like, they're kind of just like letting things ride, and there wasn't like much tactics behind it. It was like just be really good at creatives and throw things into CBO and whatever it is. And so actually none of the agencies we hired in that process, we hired all the best agencies in the space, and none of them made us any money. Actually, one of them broke us even, to be fair, but not including the retainer fees and such. So at that point, I was like kind of like the director of marketing, and I went out to this event in Barcelona. And in this event, they were talking about, like, I thought I was pretty good at media buying at the time because I had like an affiliate gig I was doing at the time. I was making like 15 grand a month, and I thought it was like, I'm the shit. I'm making 15 grand. I went out to this event, and people are talking about split testing currencies and split testing time zones and like all this stuff I've never even heard of before, right? And all their tactics was so different. And that's when I realized that all these other industries like lead gen and e-com and affiliate marketing, their margins are so small, right? Like your margin could be $12, you're in profit, $11.50, you're not in profit. And so they have all these different tactics that they've came up with for e-com that made it work really well, and that nobody was doing in info because it doesn't directly work in info. You can't just do that same thing for like a high ticket purchase or for a booked call, but the methodologies and the way the algorithm works can still be the same. So after I was in his company for a while, I spent a few $1 million on testing these things. We really started to get dialed in to the point where like we were doing it time and time and time again on different accounts. So at that point, I started the agency because I had this calling where there was a lot of people in the space that thought they had a higher internal media buying teams, which isn't necessarily the best thing because the only reason they want to do it is because they hired bad agencies and agencies that don't really know what they're talking about as far as like an overall landscape of the market. So I had this big gap inside the market. I knew I needed to come in and fill it. So a few years ago, we branched off and did that, and then grown it to the point that we're at now.
That's amazing. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So you're working with Calic for a long time. What remind me exactly, what was that business? Was it an agency model? Was it an info product model?
That was an info product. So it was a low to mid ticket front end with a high ticket back end. Yep.
Gotcha.
But all info.
So was that more or less like your guinea pig to try out all these things that were working in e-com and then use it on info products?
Yeah, exactly. So we were spending, I don't know if I can say numbers. We were spending a decent amount at one point, and you get to a certain point, you're maybe only managing ads for 2-3 hours a day, maybe not even that. So what I did for the first few years was I literally just sat there inside of certain groups and just scroll through because you don't know what you don't know, right? Especially in media buying. So there's certain groups I would go, and the first few hours of my day, I would just sit there and scroll through the groups. And luckily these kind of dumbed down a little bit, but there used to be a point where people would just post everything they're doing. Like, here's what we're doing. Here's our case study. They were just trying to get their name out there, and they would test all these things. And so I would take those and then reformat them for info. Because again, you can't just optimize for a purchase, and you don't want to just optimize for leads, which I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit. But there's like this in between is how do you get the highest quality cheap lead, and how do you manipulate the algorithm to give that to you? So yeah, he was kind of like my like sandbox account. I got to try all this cool stuff with, and then, spend their money and make them a lot of money in return, and then be able to dial in these processes before we branched off and started the agency. So all of our stuff is like tried and true. We don't like use our clients' accounts as much to like test a whole bunch of new things. We have like base accounts we use to test a lot of things.
That's cool because it does remind me a little bit of myself. So some people watching maybe have heard me tell this, but the short version is I was getting out of school. I really didn't want to get a job. So I took this like $1,000 course. I like had to borrow money from my mom. And I got this course from Grant Cooper at Social Vantage which at the time was like a really like cool Facebook ad agency I looked up to. And I used that and I got my very first client. And he let me do everything. Like, he was the guinea pig. He didn't care. He handed me the company credit card. I think we spent like 90 grand on Facebook ads one year, which was like crazy to me. And this company, we ended up scaling it in a little over a year to like 147,000 email addresses, like 24,000 customers. And I got to try all these things on it. So eventually I started picking up a few more clients on my own, and a lot of times the ads weren't working, and I wasn't as good as you, not even close. But I came to find out a lot of the reason why the ads didn't work is because they didn't have a good backend with their email. So it's like we kind of tried all these things in this like guinea pig kind of setting. And I feel like a lot of people who want to run an agency, whether it's Facebook like you or email like me, is like you got to have just one client that you
Yeah.
really trust and you really like, and they will just let you do whatever it takes. So
Yeah. I agree. And I think it almost does people a disservice by not having that, because then you're like trying stuff out with a lot of different clients and like they're paying you to be the expert. But if you're coming out and like you just took a Facebook ads course and then you go out there and you just try and do it for like 5, 6 clients, it's a lot harder to do it that way than having one person, one client, because not all metrics are controlled too, right? Like over time, you know what your average lead cost is, you know what your back end is. I got to get a very good idea of the whole holistic side of the business, because I got to see not only the front end, back end, talk to the sales team, talk to operations, talk to all these different pieces, where I really started to understand a lot of that before I can go out and start my own agency, right? Like we spent millions before we started our own agency. So I think there's a point where you have to actually become an expert before offering it. And like you said, like sometimes it's about hunkering down and working with like one person for a while, kind of getting your feet wet, and then you can start branching off. But I think it's really important to get your feet wet first before branching off and start taking on more clients, because it starts to get overwhelming and starts to get harder to control certain aspects.
now, when you went out on your own, was it scary at all? Did you have like a few clients, a few referrals that, had their full trust in you? Like, how did you get from, just starting out to like all the clients that you have now? And like, how many do you have?
Yeah, we kept it pretty small. So it's actually kind of a funny story. So last year is actually when we started, early last year. We started in March like 1st, and then March 15th the whole world like shut down, right? So yeah, I mean the first couple of days were fun, and then that happened. That was kind of like oh shit, like this is kind of getting scary now. Like I just branched off on my own, and now the whole world just shut down. So like I don't really know what's going to happen. So last year we were actually doing more than what we're doing now. Last year we were doing emails, we were doing funnels, we were doing webinars. We were kind of doing a little bit of everything last year. But I realized that I grew a company that I hated. I didn't like a lot of stuff. I really like media buying, and we have a very unique thing that we have for media buying. Like it's very unique. Like not a lot of people talk. I don't know anybody talks about it the way that we do. Compared to like email and like landing pages, like we're pretty good at those things. And I helped that other company like do all that. Like we're pretty good at it, but operationally it just drained me. So actually at the beginning of this year, slash end of last year, we actually fired all of our clients except for one, and put our staff all the way back down to one, and then completely rebuilt the agency this year. I knew that I needed to invest in a few key people on my team in that process. So we only took on 6 clients through half the year, just so I can dial in our processes and get everything I know into them. So as we start to grow, we're not breaking things in the process. I'm very big on like not wasting clients' money or like bringing on too many clients and like then our clients start to suffer. Like we have things in place to make sure that doesn't happen. Basically, we only work with high spend clients, so that definitely helps. And then right now in October we open back up, and then since then we doubled again in size. So right now we're about 14 all high spend clients, and then we're preparing right now to possibly double that in Q1 next year from some things we're working on the back end. So operationally, it's sound. Last year was not operationally sound, drained me, and I was depressed. And I made more money than I've ever made in my life.
That's amazing. So how did you end up attracting those clients? So they just hear about like all the unique processes that you have, and like what are some of those processes?
Yeah, so it's actually kind of funny. So in the beginning of this year, I've been in personal development like a long time. Couldn't really tell you exactly when this happened, but I got invited to speak at War Room, which was like there was only 5 spots available. I figured out 4 of those 5 spots basically were already pre-established from a mastermind they already had. And so I started getting like a couple clients throughout the year because Cal made a post about it and he got us like 2 or 3 clients. And I spoke at War Room. That got me some more like penetration inside the audience. And then from there, like people started to follow me for my talk. I only had about a 15-minute talk. People started to follow me. And then I had some videos I did earlier this year. My biggest thing is when I get on the phone with somebody though, that's always what we push people to. It's just really easy for me to take exactly a look at their account and then tell exactly what's wrong with it. I can explain their problem back to them before they even tell me their problem just by looking at it. And so like our conversion rate is like basically almost 100% at this point. Because like I can just ask them, like I can look at their KPIs and tell them, okay, well, based off your KPIs, I bet this is how you had it built. But you had a CBO. I bet you switched over from like budgets here. I bet you had different events here. And it's like, it's exactly it. Because again, I had so much history on doing that. I can just tell just based off KPIs. So we would get on the call and talk about our unique angles. But getting on the call was different events I was speaking at and things of that nature. Now we're doing more content. Now I do a bunch of webinars, I do 4 or 5 webinars a month, and then I make them modularly, and then I have it recorded like OBS, so it makes it like nice. I get to the team and I'm like, hey, go make 30 pieces of content out of this. So we're still reformatting and like getting that posted. Now we're posting more content. Before it was like get on the phone and then we can help prove our process.
That's great. Yeah. And I think one thing too, that a lot of agency owners, just entrepreneurs in general, is when they cross that bridge and they realize that, hey, like if I give away a lot of good information, a lot of people will actually come to me and be like, hey, can you do that for me?
Yeah.
So it's like when you give, you actually get. It's not like, oh, you just give it away and then they go do it on their own because it's so complicated.
Yeah, that's exactly how my closing process went. I would hop on the phone. I would literally just like, my biggest thing is if they have an agency that would do any of the recommendations, I would say, or they have someone's giving them a result, like we wouldn't even want that account. Our whole goal is to help fix the internet marketing industry as an agency perspective, because again, high ticket info, I think it's pretty tainted. I don't know if that's the right word, but there's just a lot of not much education on that side. So our biggest thing is like, hey, I'll hop on the call and I will literally tell you what I would do in the situation. I even give them phases, like based off of whatever this happens, do this, I'll give it all to them. And usually what happens is they go to their agency or they go to their media buyers and they're like, we're not doing that. That's way too much work, because it is a lot of work. Then they're like, okay, well then you're fired and we're going to hire them. It's not an easy process. You could go and do CBOs on dynamic creative and make it easy, but that's not how you get high quality, cheap leads. That's how you just get cheap leads. And over time, it gets cheaper and cheaper exponentially month over month until your account, all of a sudden you go, well, in the last 2 months, we've been crap, but the last, 2 years, we were great. But there's a lot of these patterns that people don't see. And it's because there's a lot of laziness on that side.
Yeah. And because you're so willing to give, and because, when I chatted with you at Flight Club, you were telling me all about, how you're reducing CPAs, even with iOS 14, and you're using these crazy like exclusion strategies. And like with all the extremely high costs right now at the holidays, what are some like ninja like things that you're doing right now that are just crushing it for people running Facebook ads?
I would say if there was one single biggest thing to take away, it was kind of what you said. So there is this thing that we do for all of our clients. And if just as a heads up, you don't have KPIs tracked and you don't have like everything broken down, I'd break it down for this reason right here. So we always try to figure out the way to be able to break down the client's data as much as possible. No data is bad data. It just tells a story. So one thing that we do for basically every account is we start to use lookalike exclusions to basically tell Facebook who we don't want. So Facebook, as you probably know, is getting harder and harder to target the person that you do want. But by uploading a custom audience and excluding people, Facebook still has data points on them. Even if they turned off their tracking, they still have those data points on those users. So when we go to exclude them, it actually basically says, hey, Facebook, we don't want these people, but like you can go target this rest of the segment. So we did this actually originally a few years ago, back when Facebook was easier to target than them forcing dynamic detailed targeting on detailed targeting expansion on. So we did this a few years ago for our client, and the case study was they had 30% refund rate. Is actually, I think, a little more than 30%. And so for us in the agency, we're always figuring out like, how can we take responsibility for this? Yes, I mean, it could be their operations. Yes, it could be their sales team, but like, how do we take responsibility? It's always the way we're looking at it. If we go and blame someone else, then we're not taking responsibility for what we're doing. So we took a list of their refunds, create a 1% lookalike, excluded them, and within 1 month brought it from 30% down to less than 10% refunds. And we're like, holy cow, this is interesting. I didn't realize how many data points people that refund have, and like similarly. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it. So now what we're doing is we are doing that for any client. So if they're doing like a booked call funnel, like they're booking a call and then closing, we're doing disqualifications. So we're always doing a survey before the call. The call basically tells us like who's qualified, who's not qualified. The sales team's giving us data, who's qualified, who's not qualified. And then from there, we're creating lookalikes and excluding them. Another thing too, we're doing for like phone call funnels that I think a lot of people might or might not do. I'm not quite sure, but I'm just going to talk about anyways, because it really helped us a lot. So again, Facebook's getting harder and harder to target. It's actually become more an algorithm play. And if we want to talk about what's changed in this landscape, we can here in a little bit. But one other thing too that we're doing is we're giving Facebook different signals to the algorithm on who we don't want, because we use high ROAS, Hyros isn't a perfect tool, but it does basically tell us like emails. We can see from the survey who's qualified, who's not qualified, their email. We plug the email into Hyros. We see what campaign, what ad sets, and what ads they came from. And then we're actually turning off the campaigns or the ads or the ad sets based off of quality booked calls, not just booked calls. Because Hyros will tell you, hey, we have 10 booked calls here and 8 here. What it doesn't tell you, though, is the quality of those calls, which is way more important than a booked call in and of itself. So you say, hey, well, this one has 10 booked calls and 4 quality. This one has 8 booked calls and 6 quality. You would think you turn off the one with 10 calls, but realistically, that's giving you less quality people. So you end up turning off the one that has the more qualified calls for cheaper. So it's kind of the whole algorithm, but it's a whole different way that Facebook is working now as far as tactics. It's become more like an algorithm play than an actual like media buying play.
Now, it sounds like you definitely have like a ton of different strategies, and the more research you do, you keep learning more and more and more. To me, as somebody who's not running Facebook ads for other people or not really even touching the system, like I have other people doing it, but like, how do you keep track of all these things? Do you just like, are you really systemized? Do you have certain people on your team watching certain things, or like, how do you always make sure you're on top of the latest trends, especially going into a new year?
I would say we're pretty systematized. I am very analytical. So again, after last year, we didn't have a whole bunch of SOPs. This year, we have a lot of SOPs. Everything's drawn out. Again, I take that chance where I have webinars that I do. I take that as an opportunity to shoot content. So I'm basically giving everyone that I'm giving a webinar to, different communities, like our internal SOPs, because I'm creating our SOPs on the webinar and then giving those to the team to chop up and actually create SOPs for. So I'm always staying on top of my game because I'm always doing new webinars, which makes me have to go and make sure I'm learning new stuff and can keep up with case studies and stuff. And then every time I do one, I'm always like, hey, team, what are like the biggest things that you're struggling with right now? Or I know the biggest things we're struggling with. Instead of going and doing a training with them for an hour, I just go shoot it as a webinar and get paid for the webinar. And now I've done the training for them. They get literally our internal SOPs. And then I also give it to my team to help train them at the same time. But that helps me keep on top of everything too. And then I'm also in the day-to-day still for the most part. Not all the media buying necessarily, but the team's pretty dialed in with our tactics here. It's quite a long training process. It takes about 3 months to train a new media buyer. Day one is our trainings. And then, every other day is all the different nuances that happen inside of it. But yeah, so that helps. And then whenever KPIs go red, like I get pulled in and I can see exactly what's going on. And I can help give ideas. So I'm still staying sharp in that aspect, and definitely doing webinars helps me do that. So yeah.
That's cool. That's good advice, because it really teaches you that like when I started out, I thought like, oh, I have to build something, release it, build something, release it. But the truth is, like, you can kind of do that at the same time. You can build things from content you've already made. Yeah. Essentially selling your sawdust, as my friend Ian Stanley would say. So on that note, do you coach other people how to build agencies at all? Like whether it's in a group setting or one-on-one?
I do not. No. Basically right now, my whole focus has been building the agency. Have some things we're working on the back end too, as far as some things that'll be coming up next year. And that's like the biggest thing. I do a lot of like group training on Facebook, some different levels. Some of them are more basic. Some of them are like more intermediate, nothing crazy advanced. My talk at Ad World I did was on the more advanced side. It was still a half an hour version of 5 hours with the webinars. So it was a little bit more on the event side, but yeah, I kind of have a swing there, but I don't do it for agency side, mostly for the media buying side. Again, for me, I'm not really trying to have the biggest impact for agencies as much as just changing the way that media buyers buy media. And at the end of the day, if I can help the industry in just that way and help people understand how Facebook works in the info space, then that's ultimately what I'm looking to do. So it's more on the media buying side. I want to make a difference in the agency side.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm kind of doing the same thing right now before the end of the year, trying to get really clear on what exactly I want to focus on and remove a few other things. So one thing I did want to ask though, because I do have a lot of freelancers, maybe some of them are copywriters, some of them are running ads, a little bit mix of both. So since this is a rare opportunity and you don't teach much to like other aspiring agency owners, maybe there's a few listening to this or the replay. What advice would you give somebody who wants to start an agency or at least scale to your level?
It's a good question. I would say number one is don't neglect your people. This is like the hardest thing for me in the beginning because our tactics are so custom. Either I could scale really fast and break a whole lot of stuff. And our results for the clients might go from my level to drop maybe 20%. And like, it would still be good. It would probably still be the best results the clients have had. But like, that's just not up to my standards. That's just doing a disservice. So for me, it was very much about dialing in our exact process. Like for a long time, I would get asked, like, what do you do differently on Facebook? I'm like, well, I just do all these things. And they're like, well, like what? And I'm like, it's a whole lot of stuff. Like, well, what? I'm like, it's just a lot. And so then I had to figure out like exactly what my unique thing I did was, because for a long time it was just in my head, right? And it was all subconscious. And then having to actually explain it to somebody was like way more difficult. So I did the longer play where I've invested a lot of time into my team. I've really made sure that they understand things, because I can't be the bottleneck in my company, because if I'm the bottleneck and I'm the one doing all the meetings, I can't focus on growing the company as much as sustaining it. So the biggest thing is figure out what your unique thing is. How do you distill it into a process that you can actually teach? And then just know your first couple of hires, like find A players. I can't stress this enough. Like my first hires were good. I wouldn't say they were like A players. And it took me a little bit to get to the point where like I had solid A players on my team that really, really stepped up. And it's been like exponential. I mean, we literally doubled our client size in like 45 days because I was comfortable with it and they helped with that process. And like it just happened really fast. So find A players quick. You might have to pay a little bit more for them. Or you can find someone you build up that has that A player mentality that you can invest a lot of time into in the beginning, where then as you start to grow, then they can train the new people, then they can start creating SOPs, then they can start taking over the client meetings. It's a longer play and it's not nearly as sexy, but I'll tell you what, it makes growing it a lot easier and makes your USP stay in place a lot faster, like a lot more sustainably. And overall, you just have a better life. Trust me, I've done both. Done both at this point. I am very happy now. And before I was making less, but not like a substantially amount less. And I was like more depressed than I've ever been my whole life. So that'd be my biggest thing. Don't neglect your people and really focus on training. And don't just, oh, another thing too, this is a thing that all entrepreneurs have a problem with. Don't assume that people know as much as you, or I wouldn't say or as smart as you, but don't assume that like, hey, why don't you get this? It's really easy. Everybody does that. And not like also timelines. You're like, I could get that done in 4 hours. Like, why does it take you 2 days to get it done? These are the things that I start to work with the team to figure out what the time blocking. We figure out we do time blocking not for micromanaging, but also for just for me to be able to see what's taking a long time, so I know where I have to dive in and help the team fix the processes. It's very easy to get frustrated and be like, why did it take you so long? But really, it's just a process issue. It's definitely me, probably them. So no matter what happens in the company, it's always your fault. Even if it wasn't your fault, it's always your fault because you train them, right? You hire them. You hired the person that hired them. At the end of the day, it's always your fault. So never put anything on your team because it's always your responsibility. So always look at it in that scope, and it will definitely help you lead your team and also just be better as a team and as a leader.
It's good. And a couple things I want to extract too, because in my business, I do have a part of it where I train freelancers, and a lot of the things that I see and that I preach to them is like, hey, you have to be unique and you have to just be really clear on who you are and what you're selling. Because I find the two biggest reasons why somebody doesn't buy is because they either don't understand what they're getting into, like what you're going to do or what, the project entails, or they don't trust you. And that doesn't mean they don't like you. It just means like, okay, have you explained it clear enough? Mm-hmm. Have you shown enough results? Do they have confidence that you're going to do all these things that you mentioned in a timely manner? So yeah, that's really good.
I agree. The way I explain this to the team too, even though everyone on the team is pretty, experienced, I explain it as make sure that when you communicate or when you explain something, pretend that Joe Schmo's coming in off the street that doesn't know anything. Is he going to understand what the heck you just said? If no, it's not clear enough. That's the way that I like to describe the communication piece. With clients, it's a little more difficult because clients at our level are like, hey, what exactly is going on with the tactics? But when we're explaining things internally or like our first meeting, like it has to be done down to the point where they understand it, at least conceptually. And it's a lot more of why, not as much as what. That's one thing I figured out. Because if I go into the what, they're going to get confused. If I go into the why, as long as they understand the why, then the what doesn't really matter because the why is what gets them to that result anyways.
That's good. And thank you for sharing all that. I would definitely consider that your secrets to scale, hence why we call it the podcast. But before we get to a couple audience questions, I always like to ask, because it's fun and it's a very selfish question, what is the best idea you've ever had in business? And what is the worst idea you've ever had in business?
Oh, geez. Best idea I've had. I would say is to slow down and invest in my team heavily. Worst idea would be to hire fast and fire slow. That is the worst idea I've ever had. Now I hire slow and I fire fast, and it's saved the team, it saved our culture, it saved everything. So that would be the dumbest thing I've ever done.
The two things, they kind of came together in the word
Yeah.
patience, right? Because the best idea, you were telling me earlier that you literally just like fired your clients, like closed the agency and then like reopened it in a
Yeah.
different way. And you also hire a lot slower. So it just kind of preaches patience for anybody who's kind of like wanting to get up and going right now. It's like sometimes the slower you move, the faster you move.
Yeah, especially in the beginning, because you have the right people in place where now you're not the bottleneck, but now you can. Here's the biggest thing I always get from friends and people that have businesses. It's like, if I could just duplicate myself, and it's like, bro, you're not playing the same game anymore. You went from the tactician to the entrepreneur. Like, now the game is, how do you duplicate yourself? Don't just blame other people for not being you. You have to. That's the game now. How do you create more use? So if you can really focus on that, and you can create 4 or 5 views. Now, once you get that piece dialed in, like, yeah, it might take 4 or 5 times longer in that first bit to get that done. But then now you have 4 or 5 views that now can grow 5 times faster, because now they can duplicate, and now they have 5 times more your power. So in the beginning, it might be a little bit slower, but over time, that's where you get exponential increase. Because once you get to like probably 10 employees, the chances of you being able to do everything and have your hands in everything are basically nothing. Like, now you're capped until you can create 3 or 4 other people. Now you have to go and hire them. And now it's harder to build them, because now you need to hire people, but you didn't take the time at the beginning to really train them or really invest your time and get everything you know into them. People are grateful for that too. Like, I don't think I've had one person leave the agency ever, and he just left the internet marketing industry just completely. These people, they stay and they're grateful for the amount of time you invest into them. At least that's what I've heard. I don't know if that's true, but
yeah, it's really important. It's like we can look at stat sheets all day long, but sometimes, there's certain things you got to pay attention to that you may not see in a stat sheet, and that's people. So
yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
eventually they'll show up because they'll do a great job and it'll
Yeah.
improve the business, but it's really important. So I'm going to get into a couple of questions now. Dennis was asking if you could show how you create your testing structure for creatives and audiences.
Oh yeah, I actually have. This is a long question. I actually have a link that I can send you with. I actually just spoke at a WebinarCon, and I just actually finally got all this into a into a page.
Sure.
Let me
So
see
what
this
I can
is.
do is I can put it below this video if you want to send me the link right after this.
Here you go. I actually just tracked it down.
Awesome. Perfect.
Good timing, because 2 weeks ago I didn't have it. But on the next page, I have one of the trainings I shot. It's definitely it's probably about 5 hours for the webinar. It's condensed into one presentation, slides. It'll walk you through everything. Like, it's advanced. So if you don't want advanced, then don't do it. But if you want advanced, then that's the one.
So I've never done this before. I'm sharing my screen on the podcast, but this is what it looks like. If you want to get to know Bailey and kind of see what he does, learn more about him, expertsagency.com/event-page. Again, this will be below the video, but if you want to get in contact with him, this is probably a good way to do it. So thank you for sharing that link.
Yep.
As far as another question, this one comes from Drew, who's in my email secrets inner circle. He says, when you finally figured out that big unique thing, what were the next 2 or 3 things you did with it? Now, I assume what he means by unique thing is like your unique mechanism around your agency. So once you figured that out, what were the 2 or 3 next steps?
I don't know if I quite understand the question. Can you clarify a little bit?
Yeah, I'm going to assume, Drew, if you're there, you can try to clarify. But once you found like what's unique about your agency, what were the next 2 or 3 steps you did to kind of like get the word out there and like show people, hey, I'm different than all the other agencies?
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, it was landing speaking engagements and just getting into conversations. We've had this approach up until this point. Like, when you need us, like, we're gonna appear, sort of thing. Like, it's not a very good marketing tactic, but we haven't wanted to grow a lot this year, right? He put something else here. So you were talking about really drilling down on what made you unique instead of it just being in your head and passing that. Okay, yeah. So very first thing was first documenting it, like writing down what exactly those processes are. I just usually brain dump. I open up a blank sheet and I'm like, okay, so I take over the account. What's step one, right? What's step two? And then eventually it might start like spidering out as far as if this, then that. Well, the very first thing was just getting it out of my head, right? Because when it was in my head, it was like, it's just unique. But then if you really distill it down, my mentor really got this into me. He's like, yeah, bro, but you could still get it down on a piece of paper. And I'm like, I'm telling you, it's so complex. I can't do it. He's like, you could do it if you really tried. And so I literally spent a couple of weeks doing it. So writing it all down, distilling it down, taking the bigger pieces out of that were unique, creating like a 5-step process from that. Like, how do I name these steps, right? Like each of those steps might have 30 steps in it, but step one could be, like account research. Step two could be data migration. Step three could be event management, something like that. But there's all these different steps in there, right? So I create my process that way. And then from there, I kind of just taught it. So I had each of those things. So I usually go over like one topic for a webinar. I have about a 4 webinar process that I go through all the groundwork, all like our kind of our main processes, and without getting too crazy in depth. I can't really show accounts and get to all like the tactical stuff, but I can give you our frameworks and like what we're doing in that aspect. So I'll tell you what, it was a working process. Probably took a year and a half before I was like, okay, cool, this is ready to like actually create as a process. But over time though, and then getting into the team too, for that, what I would do is train them on those things. So I had the trainings and then I would train them on them. And then I would literally sit there with them all day. And the biggest thing for me is a manager tells a leader like shows, right? And what I mean by that is if I was to hop on those meetings and say, okay, with this account, you want to do this, you want to do this, kill this, dupe this, put this audience in here. And I'm just telling them what to do. And I'm not having them be an independent thinker. What I do though is, and this is where it takes a long time, even in the very beginning. Okay, so we have this account here. What would you do and why? And they sit there and they look at it for a while and they come up with their own ideas. And what happens, they start to bring their subconscious to the conscious. And then when I go through and I start coaching them through, so now it's not like, no, you don't do that. You do this. It's like, okay, well, why would you do that? And they kind of explain, well, why that over this? Well, and eventually they start explaining their way to the right answer without me telling them the right answer. And that's what actually ends up coaching them than just telling them. So don't ever tell somebody something, coach them to make it be their own conclusion. Even like I've had to let people go and I've had to do the same thing. Is like, I had to coach them to the reason why they had to be let go. And, they were cool with it because, once they saw the company's perspective of it, they're like, oh yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I definitely do need to be let go. So there's like other ways to do it like that. But yeah, for the most part, it's always asking the question that gets them to the conclusion you want them to get to. So never, why is it this? Or like, it's never this, but why is it this? Right. So always ask them the question that gets them closer to the result.
That's a good nugget too. And I did want to point out that it all starts with writing it down. And that's something that helps me tremendously. It's like, if I can't see my problem in front of me, it's going to be really hard for me to tackle it. So write things down, help people kind of like navigate to answers on their own after you've written everything down and documented it for yourself. So that's amazing. Drew did have a follow-up there. He said, do you think someone who helps kind of do that sort of thing, like helping people outline the processes, is there a market for that? And if I'm going to answer that one, I would just say that's simply consulting. And again, you want to put a unique twist on it and figure out like what kind of consulting you want to do. But absolutely, that is definitely a market that a lot of people are in consulting.
Yeah.
Big, so
yeah, consulting. I know a lot of people do the same thing with books, right? Like they hire someone to help them coach them through writing a book because they have all this knowledge and they're like, how do I get it down on a piece of paper? And that's where there is definitely a niche for it. I wouldn't say it's a super saturated niche. I think there's lots of opportunity there. But yeah, there's definitely a niche for it. Yeah. Consulting. Exactly.
Yeah. And even if you are like super niche, like me, like I help people get their emails on the promo tab and spam folder. Like it's pretty niche, but it's like you can definitely charge more when you speak to a certain niche. So there's nothing wrong with having a small niche. You just have to really understand people's pain points and how you can solve those. So thank you to everybody who wrote a question. Bailey, thank you for coming on here. I definitely appreciate you hopping on, sharing your secrets of scale. Is there any final things that you'd like to say to everybody who's listening, or maybe where they can find you?
Yeah. So that link I think is really important. It goes over a lot of what we do and the whole way we think about buying media. There's a very different way. And I think Troy, we might have talked about at the event. There's a very different way we buy media. It's much more of an algorithm play than like a tactical play of like being super super like ingrained, and you'll have to see it. That's like one of our exact SOPs internally. If you guys want to get deeper on that and visually see it and everything, if you want to connect with me on Facebook, it's facebook.com/Bailey official. I think so. It's Bailey. It's the one with me with the ad world face on. I have two of them on there. It's one with the ad world face on it, and then Instagram is Bailey_Proulx. And Instagram, I post a lot more content than Facebook. So if you want any content, Instagram would definitely be the place to go.
Awesome. So again, those are all the places where you can find Bailey. The information that he was sharing earlier is at expertsagency.com/event-page. That's not an affiliate link of any sorts. We literally pulled it up right on the podcast. So that's what's amazing. We record these live and they're a lot of fun. And this one was certainly no different. So thank you for coming on here and sharing all your knowledge and all the crazy things that are working with Facebook ads.
Cool. Of course. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. And if you want to listen to the next episode, we do these every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern time. There's links below. There's Bailey's links. There's my links. And there's the link to sign up for the next episode. So thank you for listening. And I'll see you guys next week.